I was folding laundry in our bedroom when I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. My heart skipped a beat. We weren't expecting anyone. Arjun was at the office, and he always texted before coming home early. The engine cut off, followed by the distinct sound of multiple car doors slamming shut. Not just one, several. Heavy footsteps echoed on our front porch, deliberate and synchronized, like soldiers marching in formation. My hands froze mid-fold, clutching one of Arjun's shirts. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I dropped the shirt and moved toward the stairs, my pulse hammering in my ears. As I reached the landing, I saw them through the front door's frosted glass, dark silhouettes standing unnaturally still. Before I could process what was happening, the doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Then it rang again, and again. Someone was pounding on the door now, the sound reverberating through the entire house. My throat went dry. I descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling like it took an eternity. When I finally opened the door, my breath caught in my chest. 4 men stood on my porch, all wearing identical black suits, with earpieces coiled around their ears like Secret Service agents. Their faces were expressionless, cold, professional. But it wasn't them that made my blood run cold. It was the woman standing in the center, smiling at me with a smile that never reached her eyes. My mother-in-law, Mrs. Kavita Sharma. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you the most gripping real-life stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. If you enjoy shocking twists and unbelievable revelations, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now, let's dive into today's story. Maya, darling, Mrs. Sharma said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You look pale. Are you feeling all right? I stared at her, then at the men flanking her sides. What? What's going on? Who are these people? She stepped forward, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she entered my house without invitation. The 4 men followed her inside, and before I could protest, they had positioned themselves at strategic points around the room. One by one, they blocked every exit: the front door, the back door leading to the kitchen, even the hallway to the garage. These are private security personnel, dear, Mrs. Sharma said casually, as if she'd brought over groceries instead of armed guards. I hired them for your protection. Protection? My mind raced. Protection from what? I don't understand, I managed to say, my voice shaking. Why would I need protection? She walked past me into the living room, settling herself on the cream-colored sofa that Arjun and I had picked out together on our first anniversary. She crossed her legs elegantly and gestured for me to sit. I didn't move. Maya, I've been worried about you, she began, her tone shifting to something that almost sounded concerned. Arjun has been worried too. You've been acting strange lately, forgetting things, saying things that don't make sense. We think you're not well. My stomach dropped. What are you talking about? I'm perfectly fine. One of the guards moved closer, and I instinctively took a step back. Mrs. Sharma's eyes followed my movement, and that smile appeared again, the one that made my skin crawl. You see, that right there, that paranoia, it's one of the symptoms. Symptoms? My hands were trembling now. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of nightmare. I want you to leave, I said, trying to sound firm, but my voice came out weak and uncertain. This is my house, and I want all of you to leave right now. Mrs. Sharma sighed dramatically and pulled out her phone. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this, Maya. I really was. But you're clearly not in your right mind. I think it's time we called Arjun. Before I could respond, she had already dialed. I heard it ring once, twice, then Arjun's familiar voice answered. Mom? Is everything okay? Arjun, darling, I'm at your house. It's Maya. I'm worried about her. She's not making any sense, and she's getting aggressive. I think she might hurt herself. What? Even through the phone, I could hear the alarm in his voice. Put her on. Let me talk to her. I lunged forward to grab the phone, but one of the guards stepped between us, his massive frame blocking my path like a wall. "Arjun!" I shouted past the guard. "Arjun, I'm fine. Your mother is lying. She brought these men here, and they won't let me leave." There was a pause on the other end. A long, terrible pause. "Maya, calm down," Arjun said, and something in his tone made my heart sink. He didn't believe me. "Mom says you've been having episodes. She told me about the things you've been saying, the accusations you've been making against her." Accusations? What accusations? I hadn't accused her of anything. We barely even spoke. "I haven't said anything," I shouted, panic rising in my chest. "Arjun, please, you have to believe me. Something's wrong. She's planning something." "Maya, listen to yourself," he said, and now his voice was gentle, like he was talking to a child. "You're not making sense. Just stay there with Mom, okay? I'm leaving the office now. I'll be home in 20 minutes. We'll sort this out." "Arjun, no, please." The line went dead. Mrs. Sharma slipped her phone back into her purse and looked at me with mock sympathy. There, dear. Everything's going to be fine. Arjun will be here soon, and we'll get you the help you need." The help I need? I felt like the walls were closing in. This was insane. This was completely insane. I tried to move toward the door, but immediately 2 guards stepped forward, blocking my path. "I want to leave," I said, my voice cracking. "You can't keep me here." "We're not keeping you here, Maya," Mrs. Sharma said smoothly. "We're protecting you from yourself." She nodded to one of the guards, and he reached into his jacket. For a terrifying moment, I thought he was pulling out a weapon, but instead, he produced my phone. My phone. The one I'd left charging in the kitchen. "How did you—" "We need to make sure you don't do anything rash," Mrs. Sharma interrupted. "No calling friends, no posting on social media, not until we know you're stable." They had taken my phone. They had gone through my house and taken my phone while I was upstairs. How long had they been here before ringing the doorbell? What else had they touched? What else had they taken? I felt the fight drain out of me, replaced by cold, creeping fear. This wasn't random. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned, carefully, methodically planned. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. Mrs. Sharma stood and walked over to me, reaching out to pat my cheek with a perfectly manicured hand. I flinched away from her touch. "Because, my dear daughter-in-law," she said quietly, so only I could hear, "you're in my way, and I always remove obstacles." She stepped back and raised her voice, returning to that sugary sweet tone. "Now, why don't you sit down and rest while we wait for Arjun? You look exhausted." I didn't sit. I couldn't. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, how to escape, how to make Arjun see the truth, but I was trapped. 4 trained guards, no phone, no way out. And my husband, the man who had promised to always protect me, was on his way home to side with the woman who was destroying me. 20 minutes, he'd said. I had 20 minutes to figure out how to save myself. The sound of tires on gravel made my heart stop. He was here. Already. It hadn't been 20 minutes. It had barely been 10. Arjun must have sped home, breaking every traffic law to get here. To get to me. But not to save me. When he walked through that door, when he looked at me, I saw something that broke me more than anything else that had happened that day. There was no love in his eyes, no concern, no trust, just suspicion, just doubt, just cold, hard judgment. And behind him, Mrs. Sharma smiled. Arjun walked through the door like a stranger entering enemy territory. His eyes swept the room, taking in the guards, his mother sitting calmly on the sofa, and finally landing on me. I wanted to run to him, to throw my arms around him and beg him to see what was happening, but something in his expression stopped me cold. He looked at me like I was a threat. "Arjun," I breathed, taking a tentative step toward him. Thank God you're here. Your mother, she brought these men, and they won't let me leave. They took my phone. This is crazy. You have to— Maya, stop. His voice was sharp, cutting through my words like a blade. I froze mid-sentence, stunned into silence. In 5 years of marriage, Arjun had never spoken to me like that. Never with that edge of command, that tone of barely restrained frustration. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. But it was his eyes that terrified me. They were distant, guarded, like he was looking at a puzzle he couldn't solve, rather than the woman he'd promised to love forever. Mrs. Sharma rose gracefully from the sofa and walked over to her son, placing a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. Arjun, darling, I'm so glad you're here. She's been getting more agitated. I was starting to worry she might do something dangerous. Dangerous? The word hit me like a physical blow. Arjun, no, I said, hearing the desperation creeping into my voice. I haven't done anything. She's lying to you. I don't know why, but she's lying. He held up a hand, silencing me, and turned to his mother instead. Mom, why don't you tell me exactly what happened? Start from the beginning. The beginning? What beginning? Nothing had happened until she showed up with her private army. But Mrs. Sharma had clearly prepared for this moment. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd conveniently pulled from her purse, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. It's been going on for weeks, Arjun. Maybe even months. At first, I thought I was imagining things. Small comments Maya would make. Accusations about me trying to control your life, trying to come between you two. I ignored it, thinking it was just normal daughter-in-law tensions. But then it got worse. I opened my mouth to protest, but one of the guards shifted slightly, a subtle movement that reminded me I was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Mrs. Sharma continued, warming to her performance. 2 weeks ago, she called me in the middle of the night, screaming that I was poisoning her food. She said I was sneaking into your house and putting things in her meals. Can you imagine? I was terrified. I didn't know what to think. That's not true, I shouted. I never called you. I never said any of that. Arjun's jaw tightened, but he didn't look at me. He kept his attention fixed on his mother, who was now crying softly into her tissue. And then last week, she continued, her voice breaking, she showed up at my house at 3 a.m. She was banging on my door, demanding to see documents she claimed I was hiding. Documents about your father's will, about family money. She said I was stealing from you, that I was planning to take everything. The neighbors heard everything, Arjun. It was humiliating. My mind reeled. None of this had happened. Not a single word of it was true. I had never gone to her house in the middle of the night. I had never accused her of anything. But the way she told it, with tears streaming down her face and her voice trembling with hurt, it sounded completely believable. It sounded real. She's making this up, I said, but even to my own ears my voice sounded weak and unconvincing. Arjun, you have to believe me. None of that happened. I've never done any of those things. For the first time since he'd arrived, Arjun looked directly at me, really looked at me, and what I saw in his face made me want to disappear. Doubt. Deep, painful doubt. Maya, he said slowly, carefully. Mom showed me the call logs. You did call her at 2:47 a.m. 2 weeks ago. The call lasted 18 minutes. The room tilted beneath my feet. What? No, I didn't. I was asleep. We were both asleep that night. You were right there next to me. Was I? He asked quietly. I've been working late a lot. I've been coming home after you've already gone to bed. How would you know what time I got home? How would you know if you got up in the middle of the night? The implication hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. He was suggesting I had done these things in some kind of fugue state, that I didn't remember them, that I was losing my mind. Arjun, please, I whispered. You know me. You know I wouldn't do these things." Mrs. Sharma pulled a folder from her expensive leather bag, the kind of bag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. She handed it to Arjun with a solemn expression. "I didn't want to show you this, Beta. I was hoping we could handle it quietly, as a family. But I think you need to see it." Arjun opened the folder, and I watched his face change as he flipped through the pages inside. His expression shifted from concern to confusion to something that looked almost like grief. "What is that?" I demanded, trying to move closer. But the guards closed ranks, keeping me at a distance. "What did she give you?" Arjun looked up at me, and his eyes were red. "Medical records, Maya. Prescriptions, psychiatric evaluations." The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. "I don't have medical records. I'm not taking any prescriptions. Arjun, whatever's in that folder, it's fake. She fabricated it." He pulled out a prescription bottle and held it up. The label had my name on it. Maya Sharma. The medication was something I didn't recognize, something with a long, complicated name. The prescribing doctor was someone I'd never heard of. "This was in our bathroom cabinet," Arjun said quietly, "hidden behind the towels. I found it this morning after Mom called me yesterday to express her concerns. She suggested I look. I felt like I was drowning. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening." "I've never seen that bottle before in my life," I said. "She planted it there. Don't you see? She's setting me up. She's framing me for something." But even as I said it, I could see I was losing him. Every word I spoke seemed to confirm in his mind that I was delusional, that I was paranoid, that I was exactly what his mother claimed I was. Mrs. Sharma wiped her eyes and stood up, walking over to her son. She placed both hands on his shoulders and looked up at him with motherly concern. "Arjun, I know this is hard. I know you love her. But she needs help, professional help. If we don't do something now, she could hurt herself. Or worse." Worse? What could be worse? And then it hit me. She was implying I might hurt Arjun. That I was dangerous, not just to myself, but to him. "There's a facility," Mrs. Sharma continued softly. "A private treatment center that specializes in these kinds of cases. Discreet, compassionate, with excellent doctors. They can help her. They can make her well again." A facility. She wanted to send me away, to lock me up somewhere while she did. What? What was the end game here? What did she want? Arjun ran a hand over his face, looking more tired and defeated than I'd ever seen him. "Maya," he said finally, "I think we should consider it. Just for a few weeks. Just until we figure out what's going on." "No." The word came out flat and hard. "Absolutely not. I'm not going anywhere. I'm not sick. I'm not crazy. And I'm not leaving this house." One of the guards moved forward, and suddenly the situation became crystal clear. They weren't here to protect me. They were here to take me, by force if necessary. "Arjun," I pleaded, backing away from the advancing guard. "If you ever loved me, if you ever trusted me, please don't do this. Please listen to me. Your mother is lying. I don't know why, but she's lying about everything. The phone calls, the prescriptions, all of it. It's fake. It's all fake." Arjun's face crumpled with pain. "I want to believe you, Maya. God, I want to believe you. But the evidence can be fabricated," I shouted. "Everything can be faked, Arjun. Documents, prescriptions, phone records. She has money. She has connections. She could fake all of it." Mrs. Sharma sighed heavily and nodded to the guards. Two of them moved toward me. "I'm sorry it has come to this, Maya. I truly am, but this is for your own good." I bolted. Without thinking, without planning, I ran toward the kitchen, hoping to reach the back door before they could catch me. But they were faster. One guard caught my arm, his grip iron tight but not painful. Professional. Trained. The other blocked my path. I was trapped between them, breathing hard, my heart hammering so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. "Don't touch her roughly," Arjun said quickly. "Please, just be gentle." At least he still cared that much. At least some part of him still saw me as his wife and not just a problem to be solved. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't nearly enough. The guards guided me back to the living room, their hands firm but not brutal. I didn't fight them. What was the point? Even if I broke free, where would I go? I had no phone, no car keys, no wallet. Mrs. Sharma had probably taken all of it. "There's a van outside," Mrs. Sharma said to her son. "It will take her to the facility. You can visit tomorrow once she's settled in. The doctors will want to evaluate her first." A van. They had brought a van to take me away. This had all been planned before they even arrived. Before Arjun got here. Maybe even before I'd heard them pull into the driveway. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked Mrs. Sharma directly, ignoring Arjun and the guards. "How long have you been setting this up?" She smiled at me, and for just a fraction of a second, the mask slipped. I saw something cold and calculating in her eyes. Something that had nothing to do with motherly concern or family love. "Oh, Maya," she said softly, "much longer than you could possibly imagine." The guards began walking me toward the door. I looked back at Arjun one last time, hoping desperately to see some flicker of doubt in his eyes, some sign that he didn't fully believe this insanity. But he just stood there, shoulders slumped, looking broken and confused, and completely convinced that he was doing the right thing. As they led me outside, I saw the van. It was white and unmarked, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see inside. The back doors were already open, waiting. One of the guards opened the side door, and I saw the interior. It looked like a medical transport vehicle, with cushioned benches along the walls and restraints hanging from the ceiling. Restraints. They were really going to do this. They were really going to take me away. I climbed into the van because I had no choice. The guards climbed in after me, positioning themselves on either side. Through the open door, I could see back into my house. Mrs. Sharma was standing in the doorway now, watching, and in her hand, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My phone. She was holding my phone, and her thumb was moving across the screen. She was typing something, sending something, deleting something. The van door slammed shut, cutting off my view. The engine started. We began to move. And as we pulled away from my house, from my husband, from my life, I realized with crystal clarity that Mrs. Sharma hadn't just taken my freedom. She had taken everything. But she had also made one critical mistake. She had underestimated me. Because even as the van carried me toward whatever prison she had prepared, even as I sat trapped between two armed guards with nowhere to run and no one to help me, one thought burned clear and bright in my mind. I would find out what she was hiding. I would expose her lies, and I would make her pay for every single thing she had done. The van drove for what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes. I couldn't tell for sure because they'd taken my watch along with everything else. The guards sat in silence on either side of me, their faces expressionless, their eyes fixed straight ahead. I tried to memorize the turns we took, the sounds from outside, anything that might help me figure out where we were going. Left turn, smooth road, probably a highway. Another left, rougher terrain, gravel crunching under the tires. The hum of the engine was hypnotic, and despite the fear coursing through my veins, exhaustion was starting to creep in. I hadn't slept well in days, not since Mrs. Sharma had started this nightmare. Actually, now that I thought about it, when had this really started? When had I first noticed something was wrong? It hadn't been weeks like she'd claimed. It had been more recent than that. Much more recent. About 10 days ago, Arjun had mentioned that his mother seemed worried about me. At the time, I'd laughed it off, thinking she was just being her usual overbearing self. But now I realized that was when she'd started planting the seeds. Subtle comments to Arjun about me seeming forgetful, looking tired, acting strange. Little drops of poison, slowly building up until the ground was prepared for today's performance. The van finally stopped. The engine cut off, and one of the guards opened the door. Cool evening air rushed in, and I could smell pine trees and damp earth. We were somewhere rural, somewhere far from the city. The guard offered his hand to help me down, which would have been gentlemanly if the entire situation weren't completely insane. I ignored his hand and climbed out myself, my legs stiff from sitting. What I saw made my stomach drop. This wasn't a medical facility. Not in any normal sense. We were at a large estate surrounded by high walls topped with security cameras. The main building looked like it had once been a grand mansion, but had been converted into something else. Bars covered some of the windows. Floodlights illuminated the grounds, and everywhere I looked, there were more guards. This wasn't a treatment center. This was a prison. "Welcome to Serenity Hills," one of the guards said, his first words since we'd left my house. The name was so absurdly inappropriate, it would have been funny if I weren't terrified. A woman in nurse's scrubs emerged from the building, clipboard in hand. She was middle-aged with tired eyes and a professional smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. Something about her seemed different from the guards, though. Less robotic, more human. "Maya Sharma?" she asked, glancing at her clipboard. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I'm Nurse Priya. I'll be handling your intake. If you'll follow me, please." The guards escorted me inside, then surprisingly, they left. Just turned around and walked back to their van. I watched through the glass doors as they drove away, taking with them my last connection to the outside world. Priya noticed me watching. "They don't stay," she said quietly. "Mrs. Sharma doesn't like too many people knowing about this place." I turned to look at her sharply. There was something in the way she'd said Mrs. Sharma's name, not with respect or professionalism, but with something that almost sounded like bitterness. "You know her?" I asked. Priya's professional smile faltered for just a second. "Everyone who works here knows her. She owns this facility." Of course she did. Of course Mrs. Sharma owned the place where she was having me imprisoned. It made perfect sense in the most horrible way possible. Priya led me down a long corridor with doors on either side. Some were closed, but through the small windows in a few of them, I could see other women. They sat on beds or stood by barred windows, and every single one of them looked defeated, broken. "How many patients are here?" I asked. 14 currently, Priya replied, her voice carefully neutral. "All women?" She hesitated, then nodded. "All women." The room they put me in was small, but not uncomfortable. A bed, a small desk, a chair, and a bathroom with no lock on the door. The window had bars and looked out onto a courtyard surrounded by more high walls. There was no escaping this place. Priya handed me a set of clothes, soft gray cotton that looked more like pajamas than anything else. "Change into these," she instructed. "Someone will bring dinner in an hour. Try to rest." She turned to leave, but I caught her arm. "Please," I said desperately, "you have to help me. I don't belong here. Mrs. Sharma, she's lying about everything. She fabricated evidence. She manipulated my husband. I know," Priya said quietly. My words died in my throat. "What?" She glanced toward the door, checking to make sure we were alone, then stepped closer and lowered her voice. "I know you're not sick. None of them are." She gestured vaguely toward the other rooms. "None of the women here are actually mentally ill?" Priya shook her head. "Some might have had minor issues, depression or anxiety, nothing that warranted this, but most are like you, perfectly healthy women who got in Mrs. Sharma's way somehow." The room spun. "But why? Why would she do this?" "That's complicated," Priya said, "and dangerous to discuss. But I'll tell you this much. My sister was here. 3 years ago, she was married to a business associate of Mrs. Sharma's son. When she discovered some financial irregularities in her husband's company, irregularities that traced back to Mrs. Sharma, she threatened to go to the authorities. My heart was pounding. What happened to her? Priya's eyes filled with tears. She disappeared. Officially, she was transferred to another facility. But I've been searching for 3 years, and I can't find any record of where she went. It's like she vanished into thin air. The implications of what she was saying crashed over me like a wave. Mrs. Sharma wasn't just lying or manipulating. She was running some kind of criminal operation, and she was making inconvenient women disappear. "Why are you still working here?" I asked. "Why don't you go to the police?" "I've tried," Priya said bitterly. "Mrs. Sharma has connections everywhere. Police, judges, politicians. Every time I tried to make a report, it got buried. I'm staying here because it's the only way I can keep looking for my sister, and maybe help the women who end up here." She glanced at the door again, clearly nervous. "I have to go, but tonight at 2 a.m. there's a shift change. The night guard takes a smoke break in the east courtyard, and for about 15 minutes, the security cameras in the basement corridor loop their footage. If you want answers, that's when you need to move." "The basement," I whispered. "What's in the basement?" Priya's expression turned grim. "Everything. Records, files, evidence of every crime Mrs. Sharma has committed. She keeps it all there because she thinks it's safer than digital records that can be hacked. She's old school that way. Arrogant, too. She never thought anyone would have the courage to look." She pressed something into my hand. A key. "This opens the door at the end of the east corridor. It leads to the basement stairs. You'll have 15 minutes, maybe 20 if you're lucky. Find what you need and get back to your room before the guard returns." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Priya's eyes were hard now, filled with a determination that matched my own. "Because you're not broken yet. Some of the women here, they've been here so long they don't even remember who they used to be. But you still have fight in you. And if you can find evidence, real evidence, maybe we can finally stop her." She left before I could ask anything else, the door clicking shut behind her. I looked down at the key in my palm. It was small and brass, warm from being held in Priya's hand. This was insane. Sneaking through a locked facility in the middle of the night to break into a basement that apparently contained evidence of God knows how many crimes. If I got caught, there would be no explaining it away. Mrs. Sharma would make sure I never saw daylight again. But what choice did I have? I could sit in this room and wait for whatever fate Mrs. Sharma had planned for me, or I could fight back. I thought about Arjun, about the way he'd looked at me with doubt and suspicion, about how easily his mother had turned him against me, about the life we'd built together that was now crumbling because of one woman's lies. I thought about Priya's sister, disappeared without a trace, about the 14 women in this facility, all of them victims of Mrs. Sharma's schemes. And I thought about what Mrs. Sharma had been doing on my phone in those last moments before the van doors closed. Whatever she'd sent or deleted, it was important. Important enough that she'd wanted to do it immediately while she still had access. Dinner came and went. Some kind of bland chicken with rice that I forced myself to eat because I'd need energy for whatever tonight would bring. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. I lay on the bed, fully clothed under the thin blanket, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 2 a.m. At 1:45, I heard footsteps in the corridor, the night guard making his rounds. I held my breath as he passed my door, checking through the small window. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to sleep. His footsteps faded. At 1:58, I slipped out of bed and moved to the door. My hands were shaking as I slowly turned the handle, praying it wouldn't squeak. It opened silently. The corridor was empty and dimly lit by emergency lighting. I could see the other rooms, all doors closed, all windows dark. Somewhere in this building were 13 other women, all prisoners like me. I crept down the hallway, staying close to the wall, my bare feet silent on the cold floor. Every shadow looked like a guard, every sound like approaching footsteps. The east corridor was exactly where Priya had said it would be. And at the end, a plain wooden door that looked like it might lead to a closet or storage room. I slipped the key into the lock. It turned smoothly, well-oiled. The door opened onto a staircase leading down into darkness. I didn't have a flashlight. I didn't have anything except the key and my determination. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, pulling the door closed behind me. The darkness swallowed me whole. Each step creaked softly under my weight, and I had to feel my way along the wall to keep from stumbling. The air grew colder as I descended, and I could smell something musty and old, like a place that hadn't seen sunlight in years. At the bottom of the stairs, my hand found a light switch. I hesitated. Turning on the light would make me visible if anyone came down, but I couldn't search in complete darkness. I flipped the switch. Fluorescent lights flickered to life, revealing a large basement room filled with filing cabinets, boxes, and what looked like old office furniture. But it was the filing cabinets that caught my attention. Rows and rows of them, each one labeled with years and categories: financial records, property documents, legal files. And in the far corner, a cabinet labeled simply, Subjects. My hands were trembling as I pulled open the first drawer. Inside were manila folders, each one with a woman's name on it. I recognized some of them from the rooms upstairs. Each folder contained photos, personal information, medical records, both real and fabricated, and detailed notes about why they were here. Discovered embezzlement scheme. Threatened to expose affair. Knew about money laundering operation. Every single woman was here because they'd stumbled onto something Mrs. Sharma wanted hidden. I pulled out my own folder, which was surprisingly thick, considering I'd only been here for a few hours. But then I realized this had been prepared weeks ago, maybe months. Inside were photos of me I'd never seen before, taken through windows or from a distance. Records of my daily routine, places I went, people I talked to, and a detailed plan of exactly how Mrs. Sharma would discredit me, complete with a timeline and instructions for the people she'd hired to help. But it was the last document in the folder that made my blood run cold. A death certificate. Already filled out and notarized. Maya Sharma. Cause of death? Suicide. Date of death? 3 weeks from today. I stared at the death certificate, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The date was circled in red ink. 3 weeks from today. 21 days. That was how long Mrs. Sharma had given me to live. The certificate looked completely legitimate, complete with a doctor's signature and an official seal. Dr. Rajesh Malhotra. I didn't recognize the name, but clearly he was someone on Mrs. Sharma's payroll, someone willing to sign off on murders disguised as suicides. My death was already planned, already documented, just waiting to be executed. I forced myself to keep looking through the files, my initial shock hardening into cold determination. If I was going to die anyway, I might as well know everything. The next folder I pulled out had a name that made my heart stop. Anjali Kapoor. The name was vaguely familiar, and then I remembered. Arjun's first wife. He never talked about her much, just that she died in a car accident 3 years ago. But according to the file in my hands, there had been no car accident. Anjali had been brought to this facility, just like me, accused of mental instability by Mrs. Sharma, and 6 weeks later, her death certificate had been filed. Cause of death, suicide by overdose. I felt sick. Arjun didn't know. He had no idea his mother had murdered his first wife. Mrs. Sharma had probably been the one to comfort him in his grief, to help him through the loss, all while knowing she was responsible. The level of evil required to do something like that to your own child was incomprehensible. I kept digging through the files, and each one revealed another piece of the puzzle. Mrs. Sharma wasn't just making women disappear. She was running an entire criminal empire. There were property fraud schemes where she'd had women declared mentally incompetent and then seized control of their assets. Money laundering operations using shell companies registered in the names of women who were locked up here. Insurance fraud where women had convenient accidents after being heavily insured. And in several cases, women who'd discovered these schemes had simply vanished. Transferred, the files said. But there were no transfer records, no documentation of where they'd gone. Just notes that said problem resolved with dates next to them. Priya's sister was in here too, Meera Saxena. Her file was thick, filled with evidence she'd collected about Mrs. Sharma's financial crimes before she'd been caught. The last entry was dated 3 years ago. Transferred. Problem resolved. I pulled out my phone to take pictures, then remembered I didn't have my phone anymore. But there had to be something here I could use. I looked around the basement frantically, and that's when I noticed the old computer on a desk in the corner. It looked ancient, but when I pressed the power button, it hummed to life. While it booted up, I continued searching through the files. I found bank statements showing millions of dollars moving through offshore accounts. Legal. Documents with forged signatures. Photos of Mrs. Sharma meeting with people who looked like they belonged in crime movies rather than society fundraisers. And then I found something that made everything click into place. A property deed for the house Arjun and I lived in. According to the document, the house wasn't in Arjun's name. It was in mine. I'd never known that. Arjun had bought the house before we got married, or at least that's what I'd thought. But apparently he'd transferred it to my name after our wedding as a gift I'd known nothing about, and attached to the deed was another document, a will, my will, one I'd never written or signed, but that bore my signature nonetheless. According to this fabricated will, if anything happened to me, all my assets, including the house, would go to Mrs. Sharma in trust for Arjun. But there was a clause. A clause that said if Arjun remarried within 5 years, the assets would remain with Mrs. Sharma. She wasn't just planning to kill me. She was planning to profit from my death and keep Arjun under her control for years afterward. Probably forever, knowing her. The computer finally finished loading. I opened the File Explorer and started searching. Mrs. Sharma might have preferred paper files, but there had to be digital records somewhere. I found a folder labeled Surveillance and clicked it. Video files, hundreds of them, each one dated and labeled with a woman's name. I clicked on one at random and had to clench my jaw to keep from crying out. It showed one of the rooms upstairs, the same kind of room I was staying in. A woman sat on the bed, talking to herself. But in the corner of the screen was a timestamp and a note. Subject responding well to medication. Suggest increasing dosage to induce desired state. They were drugging the women, deliberately making them appear unstable so they could justify keeping them here longer. I checked the folder with my name on it, but it was empty. Not enough time had passed yet. But there were folders prepared for me, waiting to be filled with surveillance footage of my deterioration. I grabbed a USB drive from a drawer and started copying files. Everything I could fit. Financial records, surveillance videos, the forged documents, all of it. The files were large and the computer was slow. I kept glancing at my watch. 10 minutes had passed. I had maybe 10 more before the guard came back from his smoke break. Come on, I whispered to the computer, watching the progress bar crawl forward. 70%, 80%. ACE. Sound from upstairs made me freeze. Footsteps. Heavy footsteps. The guard was back early. I looked at the computer screen. 92%. The footsteps were getting closer, heading toward the east corridor. 96%. I heard a door open upstairs. Someone checking the rooms. 99%. The basement door opened. "Who's down there?" a male voice called out. 100%. I yanked the USB drive out and shoved it into my pocket, then hit the power button on the computer. The screen went dark. The footsteps started down the stairs. I looked around frantically. There was nowhere to hide in this open basement, nowhere to run. The filing cabinets were too small to fit behind, and the boxes weren't stacked high enough to conceal me. The lights. I ran to the switch and flipped it off, plunging the basement back into darkness just as the guard reached the bottom of the stairs. I pressed myself against the wall behind the staircase, hardly daring to breathe. I could hear the guard moving around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "I know someone's down here," he said. "The door was unlocked. Come out now, and we'll say you just got confused. Make me search for you, and things get ugly." I stayed perfectly still, my heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it. The flashlight beam swept past my hiding spot, missing me by inches. The guard walked further into the basement, toward the filing cabinets. This was my chance, my only chance. I slipped around the staircase and started climbing as quietly as I could. But the old wooden stairs creaked under my weight. The flashlight beam swung toward me. "Hey, stop!" I didn't stop. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could, burst through the door at the top, and sprinted down the corridor. Behind me, I could hear the guard shouting and his heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs. I had seconds, maybe less. I ran toward my room, but as I passed one of the other doors, it opened. A thin hand grabbed my arm and pulled me inside. The door closed silently behind me. I found myself in one of the other patient rooms, face to face with a woman who looked to be in her 50s. She was painfully thin, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. She held a finger to her lips, and we both stood frozen as the guard's footsteps thundered past in the corridor. "Where did she go?" the guard was shouting into his radio. "Check all the rooms." The woman gestured to the bed, and I understood. I dove under it, squeezing into the narrow space. The woman climbed into the bed above me, pulling the covers up. Seconds later, my door opened. I could see the guard's boots from under the bed. "You," he said to the woman. "Did anyone come in here?" "No," she said, her voice trembling convincingly. "I've been asleep. What's happening? What's all the noise?" The guard's flashlight beam swept the room. Under the bed, I held my breath, pressing myself as flat as possible against the cold floor. The beam passed over me, and I was sure he'd see me, but then it moved on. "Go back to sleep," he ordered. "Everything's fine." The door closed. The woman waited a full minute before speaking. "He's gone," she whispered. "But they'll be doing a complete search soon. You need to get back to your room." I crawled out from under the bed, my whole body shaking with adrenaline. "Thank you," I managed to say. "Why did you help me?" The woman smiled sadly. "Because I remember what it's like to still have hope, to still believe you can fight back. I lost that a long time ago, but maybe you won't." "How long have you been here?" I asked. 4 years, she said simply. 4 years. 4 years of being locked in this place, drugged and monitored and slowly broken down. I felt the USB drive in my pocket. Evidence, proof, everything I needed to bring Mrs. Sharma down. "What's your name?" I asked. "Kavita," she said, then laughed bitterly at my expression. "Yes, same as her. My parents named me after a poem. She probably doesn't even know what her name means." I wanted to stay, to talk more, to tell her that I'd found evidence and that maybe I could help all of them. But voices were echoing in the corridor now, more guards being called in for the search. "Go," Kavita urged, "before they find you out of your room." I slipped back out into the corridor and ran as quietly as I could to my own room. The door was still slightly ajar, exactly as I'd left it. I slipped inside and dove into bed, pulling the covers up just as I heard footsteps approaching. My door opened. A flashlight beam swept across the room. I forced myself to breathe slowly and evenly, pretending to be asleep, even though every muscle in my body was tensed and ready to run. The guard stood there for what felt like an eternity, then finally closed the door. I lay there in the darkness, My hand clutched around the USB drive in my pocket, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope. But that hope shattered like glass when the lights in my room suddenly blazed on. I sat up, blinking against the brightness. Mrs. Sharma stood in my doorway, flanked by 4 guards. She was dressed impeccably as always, even though it was 3 in the morning. Her face was calm, but her eyes were cold as ice. "Hello, Maya," she said softly. "Did you enjoy your little adventure?" My blood turned to ice. She knew. Somehow, she knew. Mrs. Sharma walked into the room slowly, her heels clicking on the floor. "Did you really think I wouldn't have cameras in the basement? Did you think I was that careless?" She held out her hand. The USB drive. Now. I wanted to refuse, to fight, to do something, but I was surrounded, outnumbered, and exhausted. Slowly, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive. Mrs. Sharma took it from my hand, examined it briefly, then dropped it on the floor and crushed it under her heel. The plastic casing cracked, the metal components scattering across the floor. All that evidence, all that proof, destroyed. Mrs. Sharma smiled that terrible smile of hers. "You're stronger than I expected, Maya. More resourceful. That's unfortunate. It means we'll have to accelerate the timeline." She nodded to the guards. "Move her to the secure wing and increase her medication dosage. I want her compliant within 48 hours. The guards moved forward, and I knew that whatever happened next, whatever they did to me in this secure wing with increased medication, I might not come back from it. The real Maya, the woman I was, might disappear forever. As they dragged me from the room, I caught a glimpse of Priya in the corridor. Her face was pale, stricken. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw guilt and determination in equal measure. She tried to help me, and I'd failed. But as the guards hauled me down a different corridor toward a part of the facility I'd never seen, I realized something. Mrs. Sharma had crushed the USB drive, but she hadn't searched me. And tucked into my waistband, hidden under my loose shirt, was something I'd grabbed from the basement in those last panicked seconds before I ran. A single document, Anjali's file, with her death certificate and Mrs. Sharma's handwritten notes about how she'd arranged everything. It wasn't everything. It wasn't all the evidence I'd found, but it was something. And sometimes, something is enough. The secure wing was everything the name implied and worse. The room they threw me into had padded walls, a bed bolted to the floor, and a camera in every corner. There was no window, no natural light, just harsh fluorescent bulbs that never turned off. 2 guards stationed themselves outside my door. I could see them through the small reinforced window, standing like statues. I had no illusions about what was coming. Mrs. Sharma wanted me compliant, which meant they'd pump me full of drugs until I couldn't think straight, couldn't remember who I was, couldn't fight back anymore. I'd seen it in those surveillance videos, women who arrived fighting and screaming, reduced to empty shells within weeks. But I had Anjali's file. I'd managed to keep it hidden during the transfer, tucked into my waistband and covered by my loose shirt. When the guards had shoved me into this cell, they hadn't bothered to search me properly. They were confident that Mrs. Sharma had already won. That confidence would be their mistake. I sat on the bed and carefully pulled out the file, smoothing the crumpled papers. Anjali's face stared up at me from the photo clipped to the front. She'd been beautiful, with kind eyes and a bright smile. The same smile I'd seen in the wedding photo Arjun kept in his study, the one he thought I didn't know about. The file contained everything. Mrs. Sharma's handwritten notes about how Anjali had discovered financial discrepancies in the family business, how she'd started asking questions about offshore accounts and missing funds, how Mrs. Sharma had decided she was too dangerous to leave alone. The plan had been methodical and cold. First, the rumors about Anjali's mental health, then the fake doctor's appointments and fabricated diagnoses, then the facility, and finally, 6 weeks later, the overdose that was made to look like suicide. But what made the document truly damning were Mrs. Sharma's handwritten notes in the margins. Notes about paying off the coroner. Notes about which police officers were on her payroll. Notes about how she'd comforted Arjun afterward, how she'd used his grief to bind him closer to her, to make him more dependent on her approval. She'd murdered her own daughter-in-law and then weaponized her son's grief. I heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, and a nurse I didn't recognize entered, carrying a tray with a cup of water and several pills. Not Priya. They must have switched her to a different shift to make sure she couldn't help me. "Time for your medication," the nurse said in a monotone voice. She looked tired and dead-eyed, like she'd given up caring about what happened in this place years ago. I looked at the pills. Whatever they were, taking them would be the beginning of the end. Once the medication started, I'd have hours at best before my thinking got fuzzy, before I started losing myself. "I'm not taking those," I said firmly. The nurse sighed like she'd heard this 1,000 times before. "You can take them willingly, or the guards will hold you down and will inject them. Your choice." I glanced at the guards in the doorway. Both were large men who looked like they'd enjoy the excuse to use force. I needed time. Time to think. Time to find a way to get Anjali's file to someone who could help. So I took the pills from the cup and swallowed them with water, making sure the nurse saw me do it. She watched my throat to make sure I'd actually swallowed, then nodded and left. The moment the door closed, I leaned over and forced my fingers down my throat. I'd barely eaten anything, which made it easier. The pills came back up along with water and bile. I flushed the mess down the toilet and rinsed my mouth, my hands shaking. That bought me maybe 6 hours before they'd realized the medication wasn't working. 6 hours to figure out an escape plan. I sat back on the bed and forced myself to think logically despite the fear and exhaustion. I couldn't get out of this room. The door was locked from the outside, the walls were padded, and there were guards watching constantly. But I could get a message out. The camera. I looked up at the cameras in the corners. Someone was watching those feeds. Probably security guards on Mrs. Sharma's payroll, but maybe not all of them. Maybe someone who still had a conscience. I pulled out Anjali's file and held it up to one of the cameras, making sure the documents were clearly visible. Then I held up my hand and pointed to myself, then to the file, then made a gesture like a phone. "Call someone. Tell someone." It was a long shot. The guards watching the feed would probably just report it to Mrs. Sharma. But what other option did I have? I repeated the gesture several times, making sure it was captured from multiple angles, then hid the file again and lay down on the bed. All I could do now was wait. Hours passed. I dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. The fluorescent lights never dimmed, making it impossible to tell if it was day or night. I had no idea how much time had passed when I heard raised voices outside my door. Not the guards. Different voices. Arguing. "I don't care what your orders are. I need to check on the patient. Now." That was Priya's voice. I sat up, my heart suddenly racing. "You're not on duty for this wing," one of the guards said. "And our orders are clear. No one goes in without Mrs. Sharma's approval." "That woman hasn't had proper medical assessment in over 12 hours, Priya insisted. "If something happens to her, it's on your head, not mine. I'm documenting your refusal to allow medical care." There was a pause, then the sound of a key in the lock. The door opened, and Priya entered, carrying her medical bag. The guards stayed in the doorway, watching suspiciously. Priya came to the bed and began checking my pulse, all very professional. But as she leaned close to, "Look in my eyes with a penlight," she whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear her. "Your camera stunt worked. One of the security guards saw it. He's the brother of one of the women who disappeared from here 2 years ago. He's been looking for evidence ever since." Hope flared in my chest. "What's happening?" I whispered back. "He sent the footage to someone he trusts, a journalist who's been investigating Mrs. Sharma for years but never had proof. She's bringing the police. They're coming today. Today. The word seemed impossible. But Mrs. Sharma has no idea yet, Priya murmured, pretending to check my blood pressure. She's at a charity event in the city, playing the philanthropist. She won't be back until evening. By then, it'll be too late. One of the guards coughed impatiently. Are you done? Priya nodded and stood up. She's stable, but she needs to be monitored closely. I'll be back in 2 hours. As she packed up her medical bag, she palmed something and pressed it into my hand as she helped me lie back down. A phone. An old flip phone, probably a burner. The guards didn't notice. The moment Priya left and the door locked behind her, I opened the phone under my blanket. There was one number programmed into it. I dialed. Hello? A woman's voice, sharp and professional. Who is this? My name is Maya Sharma, I said quietly, cupping my hand around the phone to muffle my voice. I'm being held at Serenity Hills facility against my will. There are 13 other women here, all imprisoned by Kavita Sharma. I have evidence of murder, fraud, and kidnapping. There was a pause. I know who you are, the woman said. I saw the footage. I'm Detective Sarah Chen. I've been building a case against Mrs. Sharma for 3 years, but she has too many connections. Every time I got close, the case got shut down. But what you showed on that camera, that file, is it real? It's real, I confirmed. It's the file on Anjali Kapoor, Arjun Sharma's first wife. Mrs. Sharma had her killed and made it look like suicide. And she's planning to do the same to me in 3 weeks. It's all documented. Can you get that file to me? If you can get me out of here. We're coming, Detective Chen said. We have a warrant being processed now. Judge Martinez owes Mrs. Sharma nothing and has been waiting for an excuse to sign off on a raid. Hold tight. 2 hours maximum. 2 hours. I could survive 2 hours. There's something else, I added quickly. My husband, Arjun Sharma. He doesn't know any of this. His mother manipulated him into bringing me here. He thinks I'm mentally ill. He has no idea she murdered his first wife. We'll bring him in, Detective Chen promised. He needs to know the truth. The line went dead. I closed the phone and hid it under the mattress, then lay back and stared at the ceiling, counting the minutes. 1 hour passed, then another. I heard increased activity in the hallways. More footsteps, more voices. Something was happening. Then, suddenly, the lights in my room flickered. Once, twice. An alarm began to sound, loud and piercing. The guards outside my door were shouting into their radios. What do you mean the police are here? How many? What kind of warrant? I pressed my face to the window in my door and saw chaos in the corridor. Guards running back and forth, someone shouting orders. And then I saw them, police officers in tactical gear, flooding into the facility. Detective Chen was at the front, a tall woman with graying hair and a determined expression. She was shouting orders, directing her team to secure the building and locate all the detained women. Room by room, she called out. Document everything. Get medical personnel in here. These women may need immediate care. One of the guards outside my door moved to block the approaching police. You can't be here. This is a private medical facility. We have a warrant, Detective Chen cut him off, shoving a document in his face. This facility is now a crime scene. You can cooperate or you can be arrested for obstruction. Your choice. The guard stepped aside. Detective Chen reached my door and looked through the window. Our eyes met. She pulled out her radio. I've got Maya Sharma. Secure wing, room 7. Get bolt cutters up here now. And someone find Arjun Sharma. He needs to be here for this. Bolt cutters arrived within minutes. The lock on my door was cut, and suddenly I was free. I stumbled out into the corridor, barely able to believe this was real. The file, I said urgently to Detective Chen. Anjali's file. I have it. I pulled the crumpled document from my waistband and handed it to her. She flipped. Through it, her expression darkening with each page. This is everything we need, she said. With this and the surveillance footage from the basement, We can finally nail her." "Where is she?" I asked. "Mrs. Sharma?" "Still at her charity event," Detective Chen said, with grim satisfaction. "We have units waiting there to arrest her the moment she tries to leave. She has no idea what's happening here. By the time she finds out, it'll be too late." More police were arriving, along with paramedics and social workers. I watched as they opened door after door, releasing the women who'd been trapped here. Some emerged cautiously, afraid it was a trick. Others collapsed in tears of relief. Kavita, the woman who'd hidden me under her bed, stood in her doorway, looking stunned. When she saw me, she smiled, really smiled, probably for the first time in 4 years. Then I heard a voice that made my heart stop. "Maya! Maya!" Arjun. He was running down the corridor, pushing past police officers, his face wild with panic and confusion. Detective Chen had made good on her promise. She'd brought him here. "Arjun," I breathed, and suddenly he was there, his arms around me, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. "What's happening?" he was saying, the words tumbling out in a rush. "The police came to my office. They said my mother. They said you were here. They said—" "Maya, I don't understand. I thought you were sick. I thought I was helping you. Mom said—" "Your mother lied," I said simply. "About everything." Detective Chen approached us, holding Anjali's file. "Mr. Sharma, I need you to look at something. It's going to be difficult, but you need to see it." Arjun took the file with shaking hands. I watched his face as he read, watched the color drain from his skin, watched his expression shift from confusion to horror to devastation. "No," he whispered. "No, this can't be real. Anjali died in a car accident. Mom was there for me. She helped me through it. She couldn't. She murdered your first wife," Detective Chen said bluntly. "And she was planning to murder your second wife the same way. Maya would have been dead in 3 weeks, and you would have never known the truth." Arjun looked at me, and I saw his world collapsing in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," he choked out. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I should have believed you. I should have questioned. I should have—" "You trusted your mother," I said, my own voice breaking. "How could you have known? She's been manipulating you your whole life." He pulled me close again, and I felt him shaking. Whether from rage or grief or shock, I couldn't tell. Probably all three. Detective Chen's radio crackled. "Detective, we have Kavita Sharma in custody. She tried to run when she saw our units. Put up quite a fight, actually." A grim smile crossed Detective Chen's face. "Good. Book her on suspicion of murder, fraud, kidnapping, and about a dozen other charges. I'm bringing the evidence now." She looked at me. "Maya, I'm going to need you to make a statement, detailed, everything you experienced and saw. It's going to take hours, maybe days. But with your testimony and Anjali's file and the evidence in that basement, we're going to make sure Mrs. Sharma never sees the outside of a prison cell again." "What about the other women?" I asked. "The ones who disappeared, the transfers that weren't really transfers." Detective Chen's expression darkened. "We're already excavating the grounds. If there are bodies here, we'll find them, and we'll give their families closure." Bodies. The word hung in the air, heavy and terrible. How many women had Mrs. Sharma killed over the years? How many lives had she destroyed? Priya found us in the chaos. Her eyes were red from crying, but she was smiling through the tears. "They found records," she said. "Detailed records of every woman who ever came through here. My sister, Meera, she was transferred to a facility in Goa. She's alive, Maya. After 3 years of searching, I finally know where she is." I hugged her, both of us crying now. One life saved. Maybe more would be found. Maybe some of the disappeared women were still out there, in other facilities, waiting to be discovered. The facility was swarming with police and medical personnel now. Every woman was being examined, documented, prepared for transport to a real hospital where they could get actual care. I watched them being led out, blinking in the sunlight some hadn't seen in months or years, and I felt something fierce and bright burning in my chest. We'd won. Against all odds, against money and power and connections, we'd actually won. Over the next few weeks, the story exploded across every news channel in the country. The socialite philanthropist who ran a private prison for inconvenient women, the murder of Anjali Kapoor and the attempted murder of Maya Sharma, the web of fraud and corruption that reached into banks, police departments, even the courts. Mrs. Sharma's trial became a media sensation. I testified for 3 days straight, telling everything I'd experienced and witnessed. Priya testified. The other women from the facility testified. The security guard who'd sent the footage to Detective Chen testified. The evidence was overwhelming. Mrs. Sharma sat in the defendant's chair, still impeccably dressed, still wearing that mask of cold composure. But I saw through it now. I saw the desperate, grasping woman underneath. The woman who'd valued money and control over everything else, including her own son's happiness. The jury took less than 4 hours to return a verdict. Guilty on all counts: murder, attempted murder, fraud, kidnapping. The list went on and on. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led her away, she looked at me one last time. I stared back, unflinching, and I saw something in her expression that might have been respect, or maybe just recognition. The recognition that she'd finally met someone she couldn't break. Arjun and I had a long road ahead of us. The trust between us had been shattered, and rebuilding it would take time. He'd moved out of our house, giving me space to heal, though he called every day. We were seeing a therapist, both individually and together, working through the trauma and betrayal. Some days were harder than others. Some days I looked at him and could only see the man who'd doubted me, who'd let his mother lock me away. But other days I saw the man who'd been manipulated his entire life, who'd lost 2 wives to his mother's schemes, who was trying desperately to make amends for something that wasn't entirely his fault. 3 months after the trial ended, I got a call from Priya. She'd found her sister. Meera had been in a facility in Goa, just as the records indicated, kept heavily medicated and compliant for 3 years. But she was free now, getting treatment, slowly recovering. Priya was crying as she told me, thanking me over and over for making it all possible. But I knew the truth. I hadn't done it alone. Priya had risked everything to help me. Kavita had hidden me when the guards were searching. The security guard had sent the footage. Detective Chen had never given up on building her case. We'd all played a part. One woman alone couldn't have brought down an empire. But together, we'd done the impossible. 6 months after my release, I returned to the facility one last time. It had been shut down, of course, the building seized as evidence and then sold. A developer had bought it, planning to tear it down and build something else, something without ghosts. I stood in what had been my cell in the secure wing, looking at the padded walls and bolted bed. It felt smaller than I remembered, less terrifying. Arjun stood beside me, his hand tentatively reaching for mine. I let him take it. "I'll never forgive myself," he said quietly, "for not seeing it, for not believing you, for everything." "I know," I said, "but I'm choosing to forgive you anyway, not because you deserve it, not because it's easy, but because she's taken enough from both of us. I won't let her take our future too." He looked at me with eyes full of gratitude and love and pain. "I'll spend the rest of my life making this up to you," he promised, "however long it takes." "I'm going to hold you to that," I said. As we walked out of the facility for the last time, leaving behind the place that had almost destroyed me, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The nightmare was over. Mrs. Sharma was in prison where she belonged. The women she'd imprisoned were free. The truth had finally come to light. I'd survived, More than survived. I'd fought back, I'd won, and every day going forward, I'd carry that knowledge with me, that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that evil, no matter how powerful, could be defeated, that sometimes the only way out is through. I'd been through hell and come out the other side, and I was never going back. As we drove away from Serenity Hills for the last time, I looked at the USB drive that Detective Chen had returned to me, the one Mrs. Sharma had crushed. They'd recovered the data from it anyway, every single file intact. I thought about framing it, hanging it on my wall as a reminder that evidence matters, truth matters, and that sometimes one person holding on to one piece of proof can change everything. The sun was setting as we headed home, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A new day was coming, a new life, and for the first time in months, I was ready to face it. My mother-in-law had called her private security and turned my husband against me. But in the end, she hadn't won. I had, and that made all the difference.